St. Gabriel's General Hospital, a symbol of top-tier medical care in an upscale suburban neighborhood, was about to be tested in ways it had never anticipated. When Maya James, a skilled black nurse, joined the staff, she was excited but unprepared for the subtle prejudices that simmered beneath the hospital's polished exterior. As tensions grew and conflicts surfaced, a quiet but observant patient named Stephen Ellison watched closely from his hospital bed. But Mr. Ellison wasn't just any patient, and his influence would soon change the course of the hospital's future. What hidden authority did this mysterious patient wield? And how could one nurse's struggle ignite a transformation throughout the entire institution? Let's find out. Before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from. And if you love stories with unexpected twists and a taste of justice, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. The polished halls of St. Gabriel's General Hospital gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights as Maya James took her first steps inside, filled with anticipation. The sterile scent of disinfectant hung in the air, tinged with an undercurrent of something unspoken, a tension she could almost feel. Despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach, Maya lifted her chin and steadied herself. She was determined to make a good first impression. As she approached the nurse's station, she noticed the quiet that suddenly fell over the area. Conversations drifted into low murmurs, and glances shot in her direction, quickly turning away as though no one wanted to make eye contact. She swallowed, pushing down the familiar feeling of discomfort that was creeping in. "Excuse me," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Maya James, the new nurse. Could you point me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse looked up, her blue eyes widening slightly before a smile, practiced and polite, spread across her face. "Of course," she replied coolly. "Just go down the hall, third door on the right." Maya nodded and made her way down the hall, acutely aware of the eyes following her as she walked. The click of her shoes on the tile echoed in the silence, each step sounding louder than she'd anticipated in the stillness. Just as she neared the office, a tall, distinguished-looking man in a white coat stepped out of a nearby room. His salt-and-pepper hair and confident stance immediately marked him as a senior doctor. Maya's heart picked up a beat as a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this was her chance to make a connection and start off on a positive note. "Good morning, doctor," she said, offering him a warm smile. "I'm Maya James, the new nurse starting today. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor's sharp, gray eyes swept over her without a hint of emotion. "Dr. Richard Grant," he replied curtly. "I trust you've already been fully briefed on our protocols?" Before she could respond, Dr. Grant continued, "We uphold very high standards here at St. Gabriel's. I hope you're prepared to meet them." Without another word or a glance back, he strode past her, leaving Maya standing in the hallway, her hand still slightly raised, feeling an odd sense of deflation. But she quickly pulled herself together, unwilling to let this encounter ruin her first day. She took a steadying breath, squared her shoulders, and knocked on the head nurse's door. As she waited, memories of nursing school flickered through her mind, along with her mother's voice. "Maya," her mother had said, a blend of pride and concern in her tone, "you'll have to work twice as hard as anyone else, but don't you let them see you waver. You come from a long line of strong women, and you carry that same strength in you." The memories fueled her as she thought of the late-night study sessions, the extra hours she'd put into lab work, and the ongoing feeling that she always had to prove herself. She remembered the looks she'd sometimes gotten from professors, the raised eyebrows when she excelled in exams, and the whispered comments from classmates who doubted if she truly belonged. But Maya had overcome those challenges. She had graduated at the top of her class, proving her determination and skill to even her harshest critics. Now, standing in the halls of St. Gabriel's, Maya gathered strength from those memories. She had conquered obstacles before, and she would do so again. The door finally opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with a stern expression. "Miss James, I presume?" the woman asked briskly. "Come in. We have a lot to cover, and I expect you to keep up." As Maya followed her into the office, she had an odd feeling that she was stepping into more than just a new job. It felt like the hospital carried an underlying tension, a brewing storm hidden beneath its professional facade. Little did Maya know, Her presence would soon challenge the status quo at St. Gabriel's, bringing deep-seated issues to light that had been concealed within the hospital's walls for far too long. Maya's first day at St. Gabriel's General Hospital unfolded in a blur of introductions, training sessions, and stacks of paperwork. She moved through her tasks with focus, her mind absorbed in learning her new responsibilities. But she couldn't ignore the subtle ways in which she was made to feel different, like an outsider. Each time she approached a group of her colleagues, the conversations seemed to quiet. If she attempted a smile or small talk, her fellow nurses responded politely, but with a distance that felt deliberate. They kept conversations short, with a tone that conveyed friendliness but lacked warmth. At first, Maya tried to brush it off as typical first-day jitters and the usual adjustment period of a new job. But as the day went on, the feeling of isolation crept in further. By the time her shift ended, Maya felt physically drained and emotionally worn. She had been hopeful that her new position would bring camaraderie and a chance to work as a valued member of the team. Instead, she was beginning to realize that proving herself here would require more strength than she had anticipated. As she gathered her things in the locker room, she overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones nearby, just around the corner. "Did you see the new nurse they hired?" one of them whispered. "Yes," the other nurse replied, her voice dropping to a barely audible tone. "I don't know what they were thinking, bringing her here. This isn't exactly the kind of neighborhood for, well, you know." Maya's hand froze on her locker door, her heart sinking at the words. She'd wanted to believe that the initial coolness from her colleagues was first-day awkwardness, but it was now clear that the barriers she faced were deeper and more personal. With a heavy heart, she left the hospital and headed toward the bus stop. As she waited on the hard plastic bench, Maya pulled out her phone, her fingers dialing a familiar number almost on their own. After 2 rings, she heard her mother's comforting voice on the other end. "Hey, my girl, how was your first day?" Hearing her mother's voice, Maya felt the tension from the day bubble up. She took a deep breath, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. She didn't want to break down. Not here, not in public. It was challenging, Mom, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. There was a pause, and then her mother's voice came through, gentle yet filled with strength. "Maya, you've worked too hard to let anyone make you feel less than. Remember who you are and why you're there. You're not just there for yourself, honey. You're there for every young girl who dreams of following in your footsteps someday." Maya closed her eyes, letting her mother's words sink in, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift just a bit. "I know, Mom. It's just, I didn't expect it to be this hard," Maya said softly. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, sweetheart," her mother replied. "But you've got the strength of generations behind you. Hold your head up high, do your job better than anyone else, and don't let them see you falter. Promise me that." "Yes, Mom, I promise," Maya replied, a renewed determination settling in her heart. Just then, a sleek black Mercedes slowed down as it passed the bus stop. Maya glanced up, her eyes meeting those of Dr. Grant behind the tinted windows. His gaze was steady, assessing her with a cold curiosity, as if sizing her up from a distance. The car quickly sped away, leaving her standing there with an unsettling feeling. Maya squared her shoulders, replaying her mother's words in her mind. She knew she was facing an uphill battle, but she wasn't about to let anyone's judgments defeat her. With her family's strength behind her and her own resolve, Maya was determined to rise above whatever challenges St. Gabriel's might throw her way. As the bus approached, Maya stood, ready to face the next day with renewed strength. Little did she know, her journey at St. Gabriel's was just beginning, and it would soon take unexpected twists that would challenge her strength and reveal the hospital's hidden prejudices, sparking changes she could never have imagined. In the following days at St. Gabriel's General Hospital, Maya settled into the routine of her shifts, trying to focus solely on her work. She navigated the endless maze of hospital halls, making her rounds with the same care and attention she had in nursing school. But the atmosphere around her remained unchanged, and the initial chill she had felt on her first day seemed to grow colder. The subtle isolation she'd experienced before had only deepened. It was no longer just a quieting of voices or a distant politeness. Now there was an unmistakable feeling of being deliberately shut out. Conversations among her colleagues seemed to cease entirely as she approached, and when she tried to join in, she was met with a short, forced smile or a quick change of topic. The lack of connection weighed on her heavily, but Maya forced herself to remain professional. She was here to do a job, and she would do it well, regardless of anyone's opinion. One morning, as Maya was going over a patient's chart, she heard the familiar voice of Dr. Grant call out from across the nurse's station. "Nurse James," he announced, his voice louder than usual, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Maya looked up, meeting his cold, gray gaze. "Yes, Dr. Grant," she replied, keeping her tone calm. "I trust you've familiarized yourself with our protocols by now. We have no room for mistakes here at St. Gabriel's," he said, emphasizing the word mistakes with a sharpness that made her feel scrutinized. Maya kept her gaze steady, refusing to let him intimidate her. "Of course, Dr. Grant. I'm fully versed in all procedures and protocols." Dr. Grant raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, we'll see about that, won't we?" he replied coolly, before turning and walking away. Maya felt the weight of the other nurses' eyes on her, some of them watching with quiet interest, others with barely concealed judgment. Her heart sank, but she refused to show it. She dealt with far worse during her training, and she would do it again if necessary. Throughout the day, she found herself assigned to the most challenging and time-consuming tasks. While her colleagues were given straightforward cases, Maya was constantly being directed to the patients who required extra care or were known to be difficult. "Maya, can you take Mr. Thompson in room 305? A fellow nurse asked her sweetly, with an overly saccharine tone. "He's been a bit of a challenge today." Maya nodded, though she knew a bit of a challenge was putting it mildly. Mr. Thompson was a patient infamous for his abrasive personality and had already driven 2 nurses to tears that week with his outbursts and demands. But Maya approached his room with a calm professionalism, determined to prove her worth. As soon as she stepped into the room, Mr. Thompson's gaze turned cold and his mouth twisted in a sneer. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "I told them I don't want any colored nurse coming in my room." Maya took a steadying breath, bracing herself against the sting of his words. She focused on the task at hand, her voice remaining composed. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here to check your vitals and change your dressing. I assure you, I am more than qualified to provide your care." As she worked, his insults continued. Some of them muttered, and others spat directly at her. But Maya refused to let his bigotry shake her. She completed her duties with precision, careful not to let any of his slurs or hateful remarks affect her performance. When she finally stepped out of the room, she was greeted by the sight of Dr. Grant standing in the hallway, watching her with a look of feigned concern. "Everything all right in there, Nurse James?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We heard quite the commotion." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Thompson's vitals are stable, and his dressing has been changed. Is there anything else you need from me, Dr. Grant?" For a brief moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Dr. Grant's face, quickly replaced by his usual condescending mask. "Let's hope you can maintain that level of composure with all your patients, Nurse James. We wouldn't want any complaints now, would we?" His tone was laced with a warning, subtle but clear. As he turned and walked away, Maya felt a surge of frustration but held her ground. She realized that she had just been put through an unspoken test, a test she should never have been subjected to in the first place. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of demanding tasks and veiled hostility. She felt constantly on edge, knowing that even the smallest mistake would be magnified and used against her. Her white colleagues seemed to glide through their work, laughing and chatting easily while she labored under a disproportionately heavy workload. The inequality was stark, but each time she felt the urge to confront it, her mother's words echoed in her mind, steadying her. "Don't let them see you falter." By the end of the day, Maya was mentally and physically exhausted. As she gathered her belongings in the locker room, she overheard 2 nurses whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're making such a big fuss about diversity hires?" one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. It's not like they can actually keep up with the rest of us. Maya's hand froze on her locker door. She felt a surge of anger and hurt, but she took a deep breath, calming herself. Confronting them would only feed into their prejudice, she knew. She would just keep doing her job, and doing it well. As Maya waited for her bus outside, she saw that same black Mercedes pull up to the curb. The window rolled down, and there was Dr. Grant again, looking at her with that same calculating stare. "Waiting for the bus again, Nurse James?" he called out, his tone mocking. "Such a sham. It looks like that's all you can afford on a nurse's salary." Before she could respond, he sped off, leaving her standing there feeling humiliated. But Maya held her head high. She wasn't about to let the casual cruelty of his words break her. As she boarded the bus, Maya felt the weight of the day's struggles pressed down on her. But in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that something had to give, that a change was coming. She just didn't know when or how it would arrive. The next morning, Maya arrived at St. Gabriel's with a renewed sense of determination. After spending the night reflecting on her experiences, she reminded herself of why she became a nurse in the first place. To help others, no matter the challenges she faced. She knew she had to keep going, if not for herself, then for the patients who needed her care, and for the promise she made to her mother. As she headed to the nurses' station, she noticed a stir of excitement in the air. Nurses were bustling around, preparing a room with an unusual attention to detail. There was a tension she hadn't seen before. "What's going on?" Maya asked one of the nurses, curious about the commotion. The nurse, momentarily forgetting her usual coldness, turned to Maya with a look of excitement. "We've got a VIP patient coming in. Some wealthy businessman who got into a skiing accident, both arms broken from what I heard." Before Maya could ask more, Dr. Grant appeared, his face set in a serious expression. "Nurse James," he called, his voice clipped. "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412, Mr. Stephen Ellison. He's had a serious accident, and I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and professionalism." Maya immediately sensed that this was another test. The high-profile patient meant high expectations, and the fact that Dr. Grant had assigned him to her meant he was watching closely, waiting for any reason to criticize her. "Of course, Dr. Grant," Maya replied, with calm confidence. "I'll see to it right away." As she approached room 412, a feeling of curiosity filled her. There was something different about this assignment, an air of importance surrounding this patient. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the room and was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, he held an aura of quiet authority, his gaze alert and assessing. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," Maya said warmly, stepping closer to his bedside. "I'm Nurse Maya James, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Ellison's sharp eyes studied her for a moment, before he nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Good morning, Nurse James. I appreciate your help. I didn't expect to end up here after my skiing accident." Maya returned the smile, carefully checking his vitals as she replied, "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, doesn't it?" Mr. Ellison chuckled softly. "That it does." He watched her closely as she worked, his gaze curious yet respectful, something Maya wasn't used to from her patients or her colleagues at St. Gabriel's. As she adjusted his IV, Mr. Ellison commented, "You seem very competent, Nurse James. How long have you been working at St. Gabriel's?" Maya paused, a little surprised by his genuine interest. "I've been here for just a few weeks," she replied cautiously. "It's been quite an experience so far." Mr. Ellison raised an eyebrow at her response, as if picking up on the subtle hesitation in her words. "I see," he replied thoughtfully, his tone suggesting he understood more than he let on. Just then, the door opened, and Dr. Grant stepped in, a smile plastered across his face that Maya had never seen before. "Mr. Ellison!" he exclaimed, his voice unnaturally cheerful. "I trust Nurse James has been taking good care of you. We always assign our best staff to our most distinguished patients." Maya kept her face neutral, aware of Dr. Grant's hypocrisy. He had never shown such confidence in her abilities before this moment. Mr. Ellison glanced between Maya and Dr. Grant, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. "Indeed, she has been exceptional," he replied, his gaze returning to Maya. "In fact, I was just asking her about her experiences here at St. Gabriel's." For a fleeting moment, Dr. Grant's smile faltered, a flash of irritation passing over his face before he quickly composed himself. "Well, I'm sure she'll tell you it's been a fantastic experience," he said smoothly. "We pride ourselves on an inclusive and supportive environment here." Maya felt a surge of anger at his blatant insincerity, but she kept her expression steady. Meanwhile, Mr. Ellison's eyes narrowed slightly, as though he was absorbing every nuance of the exchange. "Is that so?" Mr. Ellison replied, his tone thoughtful. "Well, I look forward to experiencing this supportive environment firsthand during my stay." As Dr. Grant launched into an elaborate explanation of Mr. Ellison's treatment plan, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something significant. Mr. Ellison's pointed questions, the way he observed both of them, there was a depth to his demeanor that suggested he was more than just a wealthy patient. She had the sense that he was seeing beyond the hospital's polished exterior, that he was perceiving the subtle undercurrents that others often overlooked. Over the next few days, Maya found herself spending more time in Mr. Ellison's room than with any other patient. Despite his injuries, he was alert and engaging, often asking her questions about her work, her training, and her background. Unlike most of the other patients and staff, Mr. Ellison seemed genuinely interested in her responses, listening without any hint of judgment or condescension. One afternoon, as Maya was carefully changing his bandages, she overheard a hushed conversation outside the room that made her blood run cold. "I don't care what Dr. Grant says," a nurse's voice whispered. "I don't trust that James woman with our VIP patient. Who knows what she might do?" "I know," another voice replied. "But we can't say anything. They'll just accuse us of being racist." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she finished her task, the weight of constant suspicion and mistrust pressing down on her. She fought to keep her composure as she completed Mr. Ellison's bandage change, but he seemed to notice her distress. "Is everything all right, Nurse James?" he asked gently, his voice filled with concern. Maya forced a smile, trying to hide her frustration. "Yes, Mr. Ellison, just focusing on getting these bandages just right." He studied her face for a long moment, then spoke quietly, almost as if he were speaking more to himself. "You know, I've always believed that a person's character is revealed in how they treat those they think are beneath them." Maya looked up, surprised by the weight of his words. Mr. Ellison met her gaze with a knowing look. "I've seen a lot in my time, Nurse James, and let's just say, the view from this bed has been quite enlightening." Before she could respond, Dr. Grant entered the room, effectively cutting their conversation short. As she left, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Ellison was more than he appeared to be. His words and his actions all hinted at a deeper understanding of the dynamics at St. Gabriel's. For the first time since starting at the hospital, Maya felt a glimmer of hope that someone might truly see her struggle and perhaps even help her in a way she hadn't dared to hope for. Little did she know, Mr. Ellison's presence was about to spark a chain of events that would challenge everything about St. Gabriel's culture and reveal the hidden prejudices that had been lurking beneath its pristine surface. As the days passed, Maya's situation at St. Gabriel's only grew more difficult. The initial coldness from her colleagues had evolved into outright hostility. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and she caught harsh, judgmental glances from some of the other nurses, but no one spoke to her directly. They simply watched, as if waiting for her to slip up. Dr. Grant, meanwhile, seemed to take a strange pleasure in finding fault with her work. Nearly every day, he would appear at the nurses' station with a stack of files, each one carrying a particularly difficult case or demanding patient. "Nurse James," Dr. Grant said one morning, his voice dripping with false politeness, "I need you to handle these cases today. They're challenging, but I trust you're up to the task." Maya glanced at the stack, noticing immediately that it was nearly double the workload assigned to her colleagues. She looked up, meeting Dr. Grant's cold gaze, and replied steadily, "Of course, Dr. Grant. I'll see to it right away." As he walked away, a smug smirk crossed his face, and Maya heard him mutter under his breath, "Let's see how she handles this." Throughout the day, Maya found herself running from one difficult case to another, barely able to catch her breath. The patients she had been assigned were among the most complex in the hospital, many with critical conditions or challenging personalities. But Maya held herself to the highest standards, refusing to let her work suffer under the pressure. She approached each patient with professionalism and care, even as exhaustion set in. Despite her diligence, the unfair treatment weighed heavily on her. Her white colleagues seemed to breeze through their shifts, chatting and laughing with one another, while she struggled with an overwhelming workload. The inequality was glaring, and it was almost impossible to ignore. As she hurried to respond to yet another call light, she overheard two of her colleagues whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're letting her handle all these critical cases?" one nurse said, her voice tinged with disdain. "It's like they're just waiting for her to mess up." "I know," the other replied, "but you have to admit it's impressive how she keeps going. I would have cracked by now." Maya felt a mix of anger and sadness at their words. They knew she was being treated unfairly, but they watched silently, some of them even hoping she would fail. The thought was nearly unbearable, but she forced herself to keep going, reminding herself of her mother's advice. She would not let them see her falter. By the time her shift ended, Maya was utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. She found herself making more frequent visits to Mr. Ellison's room, as if his presence offered a brief respite from the relentless challenges she faced. In his room, she could pause, catch her breath, and feel, if only for a moment, that someone saw her true worth. "Nurse James," Mr. Ellison greeted her one afternoon as she entered for a routine checkup. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Maya managed a tired smile, trying to downplay the exhaustion that weighed on her. "Just a busy day, Mr. Ellison. Nothing I can't handle." Mr. Ellison studied her face, his eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and concern. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's a difference between handling something and thriving in it. From what I've seen, you're more than capable of the latter." His words, though kind, only served to highlight the difference between his treatment of her and the way others in the hospital treated her. For a brief moment, Maya felt a lump rise in her throat, the weight of her isolation threatening to overwhelm her. She blinked back the emotion and replied, "Thank you, Mr. Ellison. I really appreciate your kindness." As she turned to leave, Mr. Ellison's voice stopped her. "Nurse James," he said, his tone serious. "Remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Maya paused, his words echoing in her mind. He spoke them simply, yet there was a weight to his advice that she couldn't ignore. As she made her way back to the nurse's station, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Little did she know, the next day would bring a series of events that would push her to her limits and force a confrontation that had been building since her first day at St. Gabriel's. The following morning, Maya arrived at St. Gabriel's to find the hospital buzzing with a heightened sense of urgency. Rumors were swirling about a high-stakes emergency surgery scheduled for that afternoon. The operation was complex, with multiple complications, and several high-profile visitors, including hospital board members, were expected to observe. Everyone seemed on edge, especially Dr. Grant, whose authority and skills would be on full display. As Maya began her morning rounds, she couldn't help but notice the tension radiating from the staff. Even her colleagues, usually chatty and unhurried, moved with a nervous energy. Midway through her duties, Dr. Grant approached her, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Nurse James," he said, his tone overly neutral, "we need you to assist in the emergency operation this afternoon. It's a critical case, and I trust you'll be prepared to handle it." Maya felt a wave of surprise mixed with suspicion. Assisting in such a high-profile operation was an honor, but the fact that Dr. Grant was assigning her to it made her wonder if he had an ulterior motive. Still, she nodded confidently, refusing to let him see any hesitation. "Of course, Dr. Grant," she replied. "I'll be ready." As Dr. Grant turned and walked away, Maya overheard him muttering to a fellow doctor, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." Her heart sank slightly, but she brushed off the comment, determined to prove herself once again. The hours leading up to the operation were a blur of preparation. Maya meticulously double-checked every tool, every chart, ensuring she was as prepared as possible for what lay ahead. She could feel the skeptical stares from some of the other staff members, their eyes following her every move. But she took a steadying breath, hearing her mother's words in her mind. "Don't let them see you falter." When the time came, Maya entered the operating room, fully scrubbed in and ready to assist. The room was filled with senior staff members, and the tension was palpable. She took her place beside Dr. Grant, who seemed unusually tense. Important observers watched from behind the glass, adding another layer of pressure to the already complex procedure. Despite the high stakes, Maya remained focused, her movements precise and fluid. She anticipated the needs of the surgeons, handing them instruments before they even had to ask. Her years of training and dedication were on full display, and she felt a quiet pride as she worked. Then, as the operation progressed, Maya noticed something troubling. Dr. Grant, usually so confident, seemed to hesitate. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared to make a critical incision. Maya's heart raced as she realized he was about to make a potentially dangerous error, an error that could put the patient's life at risk. Without a second thought, she spoke up. "Dr. Grant," she said, her voice steady yet firm, "perhaps we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent, every eye turning to her. Dr. Grant looked at her with a mix of shock and fury, his face flushing with anger. For a moment, Maya thought he would dismiss her suggestion outright. But then, after a tense pause, he nodded almost imperceptibly, adjusting his approach to follow her advice. The surgery continued smoothly, and Maya's suggestion ultimately helped save the patient's life. As the procedure concluded successfully, Maya felt the weight of the staff's stares on her. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others, including Dr. Grant, seemed furious, seething with barely contained anger. As they began to clean up, Dr. Grant turned to Maya, his voice low and menacing. "Nurse James, I need to see you in private. Immediately." Maya felt a surge of apprehension, but she stood tall and followed him out of the operating room, determined to face whatever came next. They walked in silence down the hall, and she was so focused on preparing for whatever confrontation awaited her that she didn't notice where he was leading her until they stepped into room 412, Mr. Ellison's room. Dr. Grant, red-faced and clearly enraged, seemed too angry to notice or care about their location. As soon as the door closed behind them, he rounded on Maya, his voice filled with venom. "How dare you question my judgment in there?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? You're lucky I don't have you fired on the spot for that kind of insubordination." Maya held her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Dr. Grant, I was doing my job. My priority is the patient's safety." "Your job," Dr. Grant sneered, his voice rising, "is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors." He stepped closer, his face twisted in anger. "This is exactly why people like you don't belong in a prestigious institution like St. Gabriel's. You're only here because of some misguided attempt at diversity, not because you have any real skill or knowledge." Maya's heart pounded, each hateful word striking her like a blow. Everything she had endured at St. Gabriel's, the subtle slights, the coldness, the whispers, paled in comparison to this open hostility. But before she could respond, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the room, silencing Dr. Grant mid-sentence. "Dr. Grant," Mr. Ellison said, his tone steely and unyielding, "I believe you've forgotten where you are and who you're speaking to." Both Maya and Dr. Grant turned, startled to see Mr. Ellison sitting up in bed, watching them with an expression of controlled fury. Dr. Grant's face paled as he stammered, "Mr. Ellison, I didn't realize you were awake. I apologize if we disturbed you." "Oh, I'm very much awake," Mr. Ellison replied, his voice filled with quiet authority. "And I've been awake long enough to witness the disgraceful way you and others in this hospital have treated Nurse James." Maya stood frozen, barely able to process what she was hearing. Mr. Ellison, her quiet, unassuming patient, was suddenly radiating an aura of power and influence that filled the room. "Mr. Ellison, I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding," Dr. Grant stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of Mr. Ellison's displeasure. "There's been no misunderstanding," Mr. Ellison interrupted sharply. "What I've witnessed here is a clear pattern of discrimination and harassment, and it ends now." As Mr. Ellison spoke, Maya and Dr. Grant both seemed to realize at the same moment that he was far more than just a VIP patient. The authority in his voice and the way he commanded respect made it clear that Mr. Ellison wielded considerable power. Dr. Grant's voice trembled as he asked, Who are you exactly?" Mr. Ellison gave a thin smile, his eyes cold. "I'm someone with the power to make or break this hospital's future. And right now, Dr. Grant, I'm not feeling very inclined to support an institution that tolerates such blatant racism and unprofessional behavior." A wave of relief and validation washed over Maya as she listened, the weight of months of mistreatment and prejudice lifting slightly. At last, someone had witnessed the injustice she had endured and had the influence to do something about it. Little did any of them know that this confrontation would set off a chain of events that would shake St. Gabriel's to its core, exposing long-buried prejudices and sparking changes that were long overdue. The tension in Mr. Ellison's room was thick as Dr. Grant stood speechless, his face a shade paler than before. Maya could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Her unassuming patient was now her unexpected ally, a powerful figure willing to stand up against the mistreatment she'd endured for so long. Mr. Ellison, now fully sitting up in bed, fixed Dr. Grant with a steely gaze. "I think it's time we have a serious conversation about the culture here at St. Gabriel's," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Before Dr. Grant could respond, there was a knock on the door. A nurse, looking flustered and nervous, poked her head in. "Dr. Grant, the hospital administrator is looking for you." "It's urgent," she said, her voice tight with tension. Dr. Grant looked between Mr. Ellison and the nurse, torn. After a moment, he finally nodded, barely concealing his frustration. "We'll continue this discussion later, Mr. Ellison," he said stiffly, then turned to Maya. "Nurse James, you're dismissed, for now." As Dr. Grant hurried out of the room, Maya found herself alone with Mr. Ellison. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Mr. Ellison turned to her, his expression softening. "Nurse James," he began, his voice now warm and reassuring, "I think it's time I properly introduce myself. My name is Stephen Ellison, and I'm the CEO of HealthCore International, one of the largest healthcare networks in the country." Maya's eyes widened as the reality of his words sank in. HealthCore International was a healthcare giant, known for its influence and reach across hospitals nationwide. Suddenly, Mr. Ellison's earlier comments about his ability to impact the hospital's future made perfect sense. "Mr. Ellison," Maya stammered, still processing this revelation, I didn't realize." "Please call me Stephen," he replied kindly, gesturing for her to take a seat beside his bed. "I want to hear more about your experiences here, Maya. It's clear to me that what I've seen in this hospital is no isolated incident. If we're going to make any real change, I need to understand exactly what you've been through." Over the next hour, Maya opened up to him, describing the discrimination, the whispers, the extra workload, and the constant scrutiny she'd faced. She spoke about Dr. Grant's thinly veiled threats and the daily pressure of feeling that she had to work twice as hard just to be seen as competent. As she shared her story, Mr. Ellison listened intently, his face growing more serious with each revelation. When she finished, he was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful but resolute. "Thank you for trusting me with your story, Maya," he said finally, his voice filled with a mix of anger and determination. "Your resilience in the face of such adversity is remarkable, but it's time for real change. No one should have to go through what you've endured." At that moment, another knock came at the door. The hospital administrator, looking flustered and tense, entered the room. She glanced between Mr. Ellison and Maya, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Ellison," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "I understand there are concerns about our hospital's practices. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously." Mr. Ellison raised an eyebrow, his gaze cold and unyielding. "Do you really? Because from what I've seen, the only thing taken seriously here is maintaining the status quo. This hospital's culture is rotten, and it's high time someone addresses it." The administrator paled, clearly taken aback by his bluntness. I'm not sure I understand. We have diversity initiatives in place." "Initiatives are not enough," Mr. Ellison interrupted, his tone sharp. "What this hospital needs is a complete overhaul, starting with accountability for those who think they're untouchable. That includes Dr. Grant." The administrator nodded nervously, sensing the gravity of the situation. Of course, Mr. Ellison, we'll begin implementing changes immediately. Mr. Ellison's eyes narrowed. Not just any changes. I want a full investigation into discriminatory practices at this hospital, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a complete review of your hiring and promotion processes. And as for Dr. Grant, he continued, his voice hardening, his behavior today was unprofessional and discriminatory. I expect him to be thoroughly investigated. His actions weren't just damaging to your staff, they were dangerous to patient care. The administrator's face fell as she realized the full weight of Mr. Ellison's demands. She nodded again, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll start immediately, Mr. Ellison. As the day wore on, word spread throughout St. Gabriel's about Mr. Ellison's identity and his demands for change. The hospital was abuzz with a mixture of fear, excitement, and for some, a newfound sense of hope. Maya, still processing everything that had happened, felt the eyes of her colleagues on her wherever she went. Some offered tentative smiles or apologetic glances, while others avoided her gaze entirely. By the end of her shift, Maya decided to pay one last visit to Mr. Ellison's room. She knocked softly and stepped inside, finding him looking tired but satisfied. "Nurse James?" He greeted her warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you for a position on the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Your insights and experiences will be invaluable as we work to transform this place." Maya felt a wave of emotion rise within her, relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. She took a deep breath, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison, for everything." Mr. Ellison shook his head. "No, thank you, Maya. Your courage and professionalism in the face of adversity are inspiring. You've reminded me why I got into healthcare in the first place, to make a difference." As Maya left the hospital that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that a new chapter was unfolding. Not just for her, but for St. Gabriel's as a whole. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since she'd started working there, Maya felt truly hopeful about the future. Little did she know, the changes set in motion that day would ripple far beyond St. Gabriel's, affecting the entire healthcare industry. The story of a resilient nurse and a powerful ally was about to become a catalyst for transformation on a scale she could never have imagined. Bookmark. The days that followed Mr. Ellison's intervention were like a whirlwind at St. Gabriel's General Hospital. The news of his true identity and his plans for sweeping reforms sent shockwaves through the institution. Early one Monday morning, Maya arrived at work to find a crowd of reporters and news vans parked outside the hospital, eager for a statement from anyone willing to speak. The atmosphere inside the hospital was tense, with staff huddled in small groups, whispering about the upcoming changes and wondering what would happen next. As Maya walked to the nurses' station, she noticed Dr. Grant being escorted to the administration offices by security. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw a flash of anger mixed with fear in his gaze before he was led away. The reality of his suspension and the potential consequences of his actions had finally set in. A voice called out her name, snapping her out of her thoughts. She turned to see Sarah, one of the nurses who had previously been cold and distant, approaching her with an awkward smile. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Sarah stammered, her voice hesitant. "I didn't realize." Maya nodded, accepting the apology, though she wasn't quite sure how to respond. Before she could say anything, an announcement crackled over the hospital's PA system, filling the halls with an unfamiliar authority. All staff members are required to attend an emergency meeting in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Attendance is mandatory. Maya felt a ripple of anticipation pass through the hospital. She made her way to the auditorium, finding a seat near the back. The room quickly filled with curious, nervous staff members who murmured among themselves, wondering what would be announced. At the front of the room, Maya could see Mr. Ellison, dressed in a sharp suit despite his arm casts, speaking quietly with the hospital administrator and several other officials. As the room settled, Mr. Ellison stepped up to the podium. The whispers died down, and a tense silence filled the space as everyone turned to listen. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "For those who don't know me, I am Stephen Ellison, CEO of HealthCore International. Over the past week, I have been here as a patient, recovering from an accident. During my time here, I had the opportunity to witness the day-to-day operations and culture of this hospital. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, and continued with a tone that held both authority and disappointment. What I saw was deeply troubling. I witnessed a culture of discrimination, bias, and unprofessional behavior that has no place in modern healthcare. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Maya saw some staff members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded in agreement, expressions of relief crossing their faces as Mr. Ellison spoke the truth they'd been afraid to admit. "Let me be clear," Mr. Ellison continued, his voice firm. "The events I witnessed, particularly the treatment of Nurse Maya James, are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a systemic problem that has been allowed to persist for far too long." Maya felt all eyes in the room turn to her. She sat up straighter, meeting their gazes with a quiet dignity. It felt strange, even overwhelming, to be at the center of such a powerful moment. But she felt validated, and the weight of every unfair challenge she'd faced began to ease. Mr. Ellison then outlined the changes that would take place immediately. A full investigation into discriminatory practices would be conducted. Diversity and inclusion training would be made mandatory for all staff, and the hospital's hiring and promotion processes would be overhauled to ensure fairness. Finally, Mr. Ellison added, his tone hardening, "Those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will face serious consequences. This includes Dr. Richard Grant, who has been suspended pending a full investigation." Another wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, and Maya noticed some of Dr. Grant's supporters looking shocked and angry. But others seemed relieved, their expressions betraying a quiet acceptance of the changes long overdue. Mr. Ellison continued, his voice taking on a hopeful note. "I know that change can be difficult, and I understand that some of you may be uncomfortable with these new policies. However, this is not only a moral imperative, it is essential for the quality of care we provide to our patients. A diverse, inclusive, and respectful workplace leads to better outcomes for everyone." As he neared the end of his speech, Mr. Ellison made a final announcement that sent a jolt through the room. "Lastly," he said, pausing as he scanned the crowd, "I want to introduce you to the person who will be leading many of these changes. Nurse Maya James has agreed to take on the role of Chief Diversity Officer at St. Gabriel's. Her experiences and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform this institution." Maya felt a surge of emotions, shock, pride, and even a touch of nervousness, as applause filled the room. She hadn't expected this level of responsibility. She had only discussed joining the diversity committee with Mr. Ellison. But as she stood and walked to the front of the room, she could see a mix of surprise, respect, and in some faces, lingering resentment. Standing at the podium, Maya took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison, and to all of you, I want to say this. I stand before you not as an adversary, but as a colleague who believes in the potential of St. Gabriel's and everyone in this room. The road ahead won't be easy, but I am committed to working with each of you to create a hospital where every staff member feels valued and every patient receives the best possible care, regardless of their background." As Maya spoke, she could see the impact of her words. Some staff members nodded thoughtfully, while others sat in silence, visibly processing the shift that was underway. Even those who had been openly hostile to her in the past seemed to listen intently, perhaps sensing the weight of the moment. After the meeting, Maya found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations, apologies, and in some cases, tentative gestures of friendship. The atmosphere at St. Gabriel's had shifted dramatically. There was still tension and uncertainty, but there was also a palpable sense of hope, of possibility. As the day went on, Maya worked alongside Mr. Ellison and the hospital administration to begin implementing the changes. It was exhausting, yet exhilarating work. For the first time since she'd started at St. Gabriel's, Maya felt like she was truly making a difference. That evening, as she prepared to leave the hospital, she found Mr. Ellison waiting for her by the exit. "Nurse James," he greeted her with a warm smile, or should I say, Chief Diversity Officer James. "How are you holding up?" Maya let out a tired laugh. "It's been quite a day, Mr. Ellison. I'm still processing everything." He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to know that I have complete confidence in your ability to lead these changes. Your resilience and integrity are exactly what St. Gabriel's needs right now. As they walked out together, Mr. Ellison turned to her with a serious expression. And you should know, what's happening here at St. Gabriel's is just the beginning. I plan to implement similar changes across all of HealthCore International. Your story, Maya, has the potential to spark a revolution in how we approach diversity and inclusion in healthcare. Maya felt the weight of this responsibility settle on her shoulders, but rather than feeling burdened, she felt empowered. I'm ready for the challenge, Mr. Ellison. Together, we can make real, lasting change. As they parted ways, Maya looked back at St. Gabriel's, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few days. From feeling isolated and on the verge of giving up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that had the potential to transform not only her hospital, but the entire healthcare industry. The journey ahead would be filled with obstacles, but Maya felt a surge of determination. This was more than a job, it was a calling, a chance to fight for a healthcare system where every voice was valued. Bookmark. In the months following Mr. Ellison's speech, St. Gabriel's General Hospital underwent a profound transformation. With Maya as Chief Diversity Officer and Mr. Ellison's continued oversight, the hospital's culture began to shift toward one of respect, inclusivity, and mutual support. But these changes did not come easily. Maya's new position came with significant challenges. She encountered resistance from some staff members who were unwilling to embrace the new standards, especially when it came to mandatory diversity training and revising the hospital's outdated hiring and promotion practices. At first, a few openly opposed the changes, grumbling about the new protocols. But as weeks passed, the tension slowly began to ease, and Maya noticed that even those who had resisted were beginning to engage with the training sessions, seeing the positive impact on teamwork and patient care. The process was grueling, with long hours and emotionally taxing confrontations. But Maya approached her new responsibilities with the same resilience that had guided her through the challenges of her nursing career. And she wasn't alone. Mr. Ellison remained actively involved, ensuring that hospital leaders remained committed to these reforms. His presence was a powerful reminder that this change was not optional, but necessary. One of the most significant changes at St. Gabriel's was the establishment of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which Maya led with an inspiring dedication. The committee was made up of individuals from every department and was designed to create a safe space for staff to discuss concerns, propose solutions, and share insights. The monthly meetings were often packed with people eager to voice their thoughts and experiences. Many employees shared stories of feeling marginalized or overlooked in the past, and others expressed relief at finally having an avenue to talk about these issues openly. The new culture didn't just affect the staff, it transformed patient care as well. Patients began to notice a difference in the atmosphere at St. Gabriel's. Nurses, doctors, and support staff worked together more cohesively, bringing a warmth and attentiveness that hadn't been felt before. A patient's daughter once pulled Maya aside and thanked her, saying, "I don't know what's changed here, but I've never seen such kindness from everyone on this floor. It means a lot to us." Maya knew that these changes, though small in the grand scheme, were powerful steps toward creating a lasting culture of compassion and professionalism. Dr. Grant, after a thorough investigation, was ultimately dismissed from his position. His departure sent a clear message that discrimination and unprofessional behavior would no longer be tolerated. His removal was a significant turning point, signaling that the hospital was serious about holding all staff accountable. Some of his former supporters were upset, but others quietly admitted that the hospital was better off without his toxic influence. Maya couldn't deny feeling a sense of justice and relief, knowing that St. Gabriel's was finally becoming a place where individuals could thrive without fear of bias or mistreatment. As word of St. Gabriel's transformation spread, other hospitals began reaching out, curious about the changes taking place and eager to learn from their progress. Maya found herself in high demand as a speaker, and she was invited to medical conferences and diversity seminars across the country. She shared her journey, not only discussing the challenges St. Gabriel's had faced, but also the victories that had come from embracing change. She spoke openly about the prejudice she had endured and the courage it had taken to rise above it. 1 year after Mr. Ellison's intervention, Maya stood before a packed auditorium at a national healthcare conference. The crowd was silent, their attention fixed on her as she began to speak. "A year ago," Maya began, her voice filled with emotion, "I was a nurse on the verge of giving up. I faced challenges that made me question whether I belonged in this field. Today, I stand before you as proof that change is possible, that one voice can make a difference." She recounted the journey of transformation at St. Gabriel's, describing how they had gone from a place where discrimination and isolation festered to one where every individual was respected and valued. She didn't shy away from the obstacles they'd encountered along the way, but she highlighted the progress they'd made, the lives touched, the minds changed, and the culture redefined. After the conference, Mr. Ellison, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Maya with a warm smile. "Maya," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed the ongoing progress at St. Gabriel's and the ripple effect it was having throughout the healthcare industry. Mr. Ellison shared that several other hospitals within the HealthCore International network had already started implementing similar diversity initiatives, inspired by Maya's story and St. Gabriel's journey. "You know, Maya," he said thoughtfully, "when I checked into St. Gabriel's after my accident, I never imagined the journey it would set in motion. You've not only transformed St. Gabriel's, but you've also reignited my own passion for this work. What you've done here will set a precedent for countless other hospitals." Maya nodded, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Ellison. None of this would have been possible without your support." As she prepared to return to St. Gabriel's, Maya reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She had gone from feeling isolated and undervalued to leading a movement that was reshaping the entire hospital. The work was far from over, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a mission to ensure that every healthcare worker, regardless of background, could thrive in an environment free from prejudice. Returning to St. Gabriel's, Maya was greeted by Sarah, who had become one of her strongest allies since the changes had begun. The hospital buzzed with new energy, and staff members collaborated and communicated in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Maya paused to look at a new mural that had been added to the hospital walls. The artwork depicted a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together, a plaque beneath it reading, "Diversity is our strength, inclusion is our commitment, compassion is our calling." As Maya settled into her office, ready to tackle the new challenges awaiting her, she couldn't help but smile. The transformation of St. Gabriel's had been hard-won, but it was just the beginning. Changing hearts and minds and an entire system was ongoing work, and Maya was ready for it. The future felt brighter than ever, and as she reflected on the journey so far, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The transformation at St. Gabriel's General Hospital became an inspiring story that reached far beyond its walls. Healthcare professionals, hospital administrators, and community leaders from across the country looked to St. Gabriel's as a model for how to create a truly inclusive environment. Maya's work as Chief Diversity Officer was challenging but immensely rewarding. She was no longer just a nurse navigating the difficulties of the job. She was a leader, an advocate, and a change-maker. Each day brought new responsibilities, as well as new opportunities to influence the healthcare system for the better. Her role included overseeing diversity initiatives, conducting sensitivity and inclusion training for the staff, and working closely with the administration to make sure St. Gabriel's policies remained fair and just. She spent countless hours developing outreach programs for the local community, ensuring that the hospital served as a beacon of respect and equality for everyone who walked through its doors. Over time, the cultural shift within St. Gabriel's became undeniable. Staff members who once held back or avoided interacting with Maya are now actively engaged in discussions about equality and professional respect. Nurses, doctors, and support staff worked together with a renewed sense of camaraderie, and even those who had initially resisted the changes were beginning to see their value. The hallways of St. Gabriel's, once filled with subtle tension, now resonated with a spirit of support and collaboration. One day, Maya received a message from a nursing student who had read about her story. The young woman expressed her admiration for Maya's strength and dedication, confessing that she had often doubted whether she had a place in healthcare. She had encountered similar prejudices during her studies, and Maya's story had given her the courage to keep pursuing her dreams. Maya replied, feeling a profound sense of purpose. "Never doubt your worth," she wrote. "The world needs you, your passion, your skills, and your unique perspective. Remember, you're never alone. There are those who have walked this path before you and others who will walk it alongside you. Don't let anyone make you feel that you don't belong." These words were not just encouragement for the young nurse, but a reminder of the journey Maya herself had taken. She remembered her first day at St. Gabriel's, the whispers, the isolation, and the discouragement she'd felt. She had overcome every obstacle placed in her path, not just for herself but for those who would come after her. 1 year after St. Gabriel's transformation, the hospital celebrated by dedicating a new wing designed to serve the local community, with a focus on outreach programs, free health screenings, and mental health services for underserved populations. The wing was named the Unity Center, and its mission was to ensure that quality healthcare was accessible to everyone, regardless of background. During the dedication ceremony, Maya stood on the stage alongside Mr. Ellison and the hospital's board members. She was asked to give a short speech, and as she looked out at the crowd of hospital staff, community members, and even a few familiar patients, she felt a surge of pride. "A little over a year ago, I was just one nurse doing her best in a difficult environment," Maya began, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "I faced challenges that felt insurmountable at times, but I learned that with support, courage, and resilience, real change is possible." Today, St. Gabriel's isn't just a place to work. It's a community that values each individual and honors their unique strengths. And together, we're building a legacy of inclusion and compassion that will serve generations to come. As she spoke, Maya saw tears in the eyes of some of her colleagues, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her story started with struggle, but it ended with hope, purpose, and unity. After the ceremony, Mr. Ellison approached her with a proud smile. "You've accomplished something incredible here, Maya," he said. "I couldn't be prouder of you. St. Gabriel's is thriving because of the foundation you've helped build." "Thank you, Mr. Ellison," Maya replied, feeling the depth of his words. "It wouldn't have been possible without your support. I'll never forget the moment you stood up for me when I needed it most." He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "You remind me of why I entered this field, Maya, and I know that what you've created here will continue to inspire others far beyond this hospital." In the weeks that followed, Maya continued her work, but her influence extended far beyond her role as Chief Diversity Officer. Gabriel's became known throughout the HealthCore International Network as a leader in diversity and inclusion, and other hospitals soon began consulting with Maya and her team to replicate their success. As time went on, the memory of Dr. Grant's influence faded, replaced by a culture of trust and respect. St. Gabriel's had become a place where employees were valued for their skills and dedication, not judged by their backgrounds or appearances. New staff members felt welcomed, and Maya could see the difference in how they carried themselves, knowing they were entering a workplace that celebrated their strengths. One evening, as Maya was wrapping up a long day, Sarah approached her with a grateful smile. "Maya, I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "Not only for what you've done for the hospital, but for what you've done for me. I've learned so much from you, and I'm truly grateful." Maya smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "Thank you, Sarah. It means a lot to hear that. We're all in this together, and I couldn't have done it without the support of people like you." As Maya left the hospital that evening, she paused in the lobby, looking up at the mural that had been a symbol of St. Gabriel's transformation. The artwork depicted a diverse group of healthcare professionals standing shoulder to shoulder, a plaque beneath it reading, "Unity through Diversity." a legacy of care. She knew that her journey was far from over and that challenges would still arise. But Maya was ready to face them, with the knowledge that she had helped create a place where every person, nurse, doctor, patient, or visitor, could feel respected and valued. With a sense of fulfillment and a renewed commitment to her calling, Maya walked out of St. Gabriel's General Hospital, knowing she had not only changed one hospital, but had set an example for the entire healthcare industry. Her journey was proof that one person's courage, resilience, and dedication could truly make a difference, and that change, once sparked, could light a path for others to follow. Maya's journey at St. Gabriel's General Hospital is a powerful testament to the impact that one individual's courage and perseverance can have in transforming an entire institution. Her story reminds us that positive change is possible, even in the most challenging environments, and that standing up against discrimination and prejudice can pave the way for a culture of respect, unity, and inclusion. Throughout her experience, Maya demonstrated the importance of resilience, integrity, and compassion, values that not only helped her succeed, but also uplifted those around her. Mr. Ellison's intervention showed the crucial role allies play in bringing about meaningful change, highlighting that even those with influence must stand up against injustice. This story also teaches us that a supportive community, guided by strong leadership and a commitment to equality, can foster a healthier, more compassionate environment for both patients and staff. It is a reminder to all of us, whether we are leaders, colleagues, or caregivers, that we have the power to create a world where every individual is valued and given a fair chance to thrive. If you found this story inspiring, comment with 1. If it deeply resonated with you, comment with 2. And feel free to share your own stories or experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what lessons you took away from Maya's journey.